let's start, Chairman. Okay, sige. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. On the part of the Senate panel, I'm calling to order our Joint Congressional Oversight Committee here on the Philippine Competition Act hearing in order. Chairman.
Good morning. On the part of the House, this meeting of the Joint Congressional Oversight Committee on the Philippine Competition Act is hereby called to order.
So, for the record, let me now recognize the presence of the members of the Senate panel. I have with me the Vice Chairman of the Senate panel, the Chairman of our Committee on Economic Affairs, Senator Win Gatchalian, who is very hardworking. Let me remind or warn you that the Vice Chairman is very hardworking. And of course, the chair of the House panel is Congressman Arthur Yap. Welcome, sir, and thank you. Thank you for coming all the way to the Senate premises for our hearing. Kung babalik ta rin naman din kasi, if we were to go to the House, kami naman po ang mahirapan. So, si Congressman Yap has sacrificed a little to attend today's hearing. So this is the first meeting for the Joint Congressional Oversight Committee on the PCA. Yan po ang ating Yan po ang ating abbreviation for the Philippine Competition Act. So let us first dispense with some organizational matters. With the permission of the chair of the House panel, I would move that we adopt the rules of procedure of the Joint Congressional Oversight Committee on the Philippine Competition Act, copies of which were sent in advance to the members of this committee.
Your motion is seconded, Mr. Chair.
Senator Gatchalian?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so the motion is hereby adopted, but in summary, to the people present here, there is nothing surprising in the rules of procedure. It's the common rules of procedure of hearings in the Senate and in the House. I also move to designate the Secretariat of the Senate Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship and the Secretariat of the House Committee on Economic Affairs to be part of the Joint Secretariat for the Congressional Oversight Committee on the Philippine Competition Act.
I concur, Mr. Chair.
Second, Mr. Chair.
So thank you very much. So that motion has been approved also. Okay. So at this point, may I call on our committee secretary, Ms. Jingle Concon Alam, to acknowledge the presence of our resource persons for today's hearing. Ma'am,
Thank you.
please.
Yes. Thank you very much, sir. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Senate. Allow me to acknowledge all our invited guests today. From the Philippine Competition Commission, Chairman Arsenio Balsacan, good morning, sir. Commissioner Amabel Asuncion, good morning, ma'am. And from the Department of Trade and Industry, we have Undersecretary Ruth B. Castello. Good morning, ma'am. From the Department of Justice, Office for Competition, we have OIC, Attorney Rina Agtarap. Morning, ma'am. From the Philippine Chamber of Commerce, we have Attorney Anthony Benzon. Morning, sir. From Ateneo de Manila School of Law, we have Attorney Anthony Abad and Attorney Christine Alcantara. Good morning po. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. So, the purpose of this hearing is to update the committee on the implementation of the Philippine Competition Act. Through this Congressional Oversight Committee, we aim to identify the challenges faced by the Commission in carrying out their mandate. And the Chair would like to welcome and acknowledge the presence of a member of the Senate panel, Senator Sani Angara. Warning din and reminder, hardworking din po yan. So yan po ang mga members ng Senate panel. So we'd also like to hear from the Commission about their action plans for the coming years. So in short, actually this is your show kasi you just tell us what has been happening. So our agenda will consist of the following. We shall hear updates from the Philippine Competition Commission and some information on the following matters, which we based on the papers you submitted to us: accomplishment reports, issues and challenges in the implementation of the Philippine Competition Act, strategic objectives, priorities, and action plans, and your policy support to Congress, because you may have a legislative wish list, no? And then we will now, after the PCC, we will hear additional insights and comments from our invited guests, like the Department of Justice, because there is a designated competition authority. I think it's still existing, no? Since 2011 po yan, ano? Office for Competition, which is within the Department of Justice. And then we will hear from the DTI. Yusek Castel is also here. Philippine Chamber of Commerce, Attorney Bengson, and then the Ateneo de Manila University School of Law, which has professors on competition law. Meron ba tayo niya sa UP, pare? Wala, so, looks like Ateneo de Manila is ahead of the other.
Looks like a monopoly, Mr. Chairman. It looks like a monopoly, Mr. Chairman.
In the spirit of competition. Okay. To promote, and then other matters na lang po. So we'll try to keep this the hearing very efficient. We'll try to end 12:30 because I did not really prepare for lunch. But we will sometime in between this moment and 12 noon, we will serve heavy snacks naman. Okay, so siguro, if there are no comments from the members of the panels, so we can now recognize the chairman of the Philippine Competition Commission. Go ahead, Chairman Balisacan. This is your show, sir.
Senator Coco Pimentel and Congressman Arthur Yap, Joint Presiding Chairperson of the Congressional Oversight Committee on Competition, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, the Joint Chairperson, Senator Sani Angara, our colleagues from the DTI, the DOJ, and the PCC, representatives from the business chambers, consumer groups, and the academe, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. A little over 3 years ago, Congress passed a game-changing piece of legislation that aimed to protect the competition landscape and introduce the competition lens to businesses, consumers, public institutions, and civil society. The road to this landmark achievement took 24 years, but through the efforts of our legislators, some of whom are here, the Philippines now joins the ranks of countries that enforce their own antitrust law within their jurisdictions. In today's organizational meeting of the Congressional Oversight Committee on Competition, the Philippine Competition Commission, or PCC, will provide updates on the implementation of Republic Act number 10667, or the Philippine Competition Act. The presentation will be organized as follows. First, I will talk briefly about the economic and historical context which led to the creation of the PCC and about our agency's mandate as provided by the law. Second, I will describe the agency's organizational development, which reflects how the agency grew from its inception up to the present day. Third, I will then provide a summary of the PCC's strategic programs and accomplishments. Lastly, I will discuss the issues and challenges that the agency faces, as well as strategic priorities and emerging concerns moving forward. In recent years, the Philippine economy has taken off to a higher speed, giving us a ray of hope that we are on our way to achieving a developed country status. Yet, the economy is constrained from reaching its potential by factors such as weak competitiveness and poor social outcomes in the areas of poverty reduction and human development. Weak competition within industries, brought by high barriers to trade and investment, entrepreneurship, and poorly informed state controls, has prevented our growth from reaching an even higher growth trajectory. Finally, after more than 2 decades, the government has taken the initial steps to fostering competition through the enactment of the PCA and the introduction of competition policy in the Philippine Development Plan 2017 to 2022. This means that competition policy has now become part and parcel of the government's arsenal of strategies toward inclusive and rapid development. Under the PCA, the PCC is mandated to prohibit anti-competitive agreements, abuses of market dominance, and anti-competitive mergers and acquisitions. As the country's competition policies champion, the PCC also conducts market studies and advocates for pro-competitive government policies and regulations. The PCC's mandate extends to all sectors of the economy and covers all sizes of businesses, from micro, small, and medium enterprises to multinational corporations. However, in prioritizing the use of limited resources, the application of competition policy is well suited for markets having artificial monopolies, that is, monopolies created, enhanced, or protected by laws, regulatory issuances, or other structural barriers, and those having a few dominant players. In 2016, the Commission was initially organized to have offices and divisions which reflect distinct competencies and ensure the smooth functioning of our operations. Administrative matters were largely handled by our Administrative and Legal Office and Financial Planning and Management Office, while our core operations involve the Mergers and Acquisitions Office, Competition Enforcement Office, and Policy Research and Knowledge Management Office. Since our establishment, Mr. Chairman, we as an institution learned from various internal and external inputs and found our bearings through learning by doing. The Commission has proposed to the Office of the President a new organizational structure with offices composed of specialized units and divisions needed to handle the increasing volume and complexity of cases. We believe that this new structure will allow us to work more efficiently and effectively and create leaner organizational units that are sharply aware of the rules in fulfilling our agency's mandate. In terms of our personnel capacity, the PCC has utilized more than 3/4 of our plantilla positions, with 153 positions being filled up by July of this year. Of these 153 positions, 41 are lawyers and 16 are economists, reflecting the unique combination that effective competition analysis and enforcement require. Our budget has also grown since 2016 to reflect the resources that we need to fulfill our mandate. I now proceed, Mr. Chairman, to our agency's progress in terms of operations. With respect to the PCC's merger control regime, we have become quite busy as businesses became familiar with our merger notification rules. To date, we have received 151 mergers and acquisition transactions. Of these, 143 were approved, with 2 transactions approved with voluntary commitments from the merging parties. Presently, 4 transactions are undergoing review, 1 under the sufficiency determination stage, and 3 under Phase 1 review. It should be noted that the Commission has conducted 154 pre-notification consultations as part of our efforts to increase transparency, improve procedural efficiency, and encourage compliance among our stakeholders. In total, Mr. Chairman, the value of transactions we have reviewed since we started is nearing 2.4 trillion pesos. Most of these transactions are in the manufacturing sector, followed by finance and insurance, energy and services such as real estate, transportation, and storage. We have the details, Mr. Chairman, if you're interested to see the details. To streamline its merger review processes, the PCC issued its rules and merger procedure last November 2017 and pushed forward with the issuance of various clarificatory notes and guidelines aimed at further improving procedural efficiency. Notably, in March 2018, the PCC adjusted its merger notification thresholds after carefully studying the Commission's history of notified transactions and considering trends in our economy. From a size of party threshold of 1 billion pesos, we have raised the value to 5 billion pesos. And from a size of transaction threshold of 1 billion pesos, we have raised the value to 2 billion pesos. These numbers are also subject to automatic annual adjustments to reflect inflation and changes in the country's economy. Through this adjustment, the PCC ensured that the thresholds are not too low to be a burden to business and not too high for potentially harmful transactions to evade mandatory reviews. Let me turn to the enforcement, Mr. Chairman. As the country's antitrust enforcer, the PCC has taken the necessary strides to move forward in the conduct of investigations and anti-competitive conduct. Since the agency's inception, a total of 120 queries and informal complaints on possible anti-competitive conduct was acted upon by our enforcement office. This noticeable rise in the flood of queries indicate how we have been making progress in raising awareness among our stakeholders. 2 full administrative investigations, or FAIs, have been closed and completed by the Commission, while 7 preliminary inquiries have been conducted. Currently, 4 FAIs and 1 preliminary inquiries are ongoing, involving the cement, power, garlic, and life insurance sectors. We have also been tirelessly building our enforcement framework since day one. On September 30 of last year, the 2017 Rules of Procedure of the PCC was issued, in line with our commitment to maintaining procedural transparency, due process, and predictability. These rules govern the conduct of our enforcement investigations, hearings, and proceedings, including provisions on fines, penalties, and non-adversarial remedies. We have found the right momentum to implement the rules as it was immediately released after the end of the 2-year transitory period of the PCA. During this period, Mr. Chairman, businesses were given leeway to restructure their organizations and trade practices so as not to be at odds with the law. With the end of the transitory period on August 8, 2017, the PCC now has full enforcement powers to penalize erring businesses. Considering these things in place, the PCC is expected to increase its detection rate and handle a steadier stream of enforcement cases. Now more than ever, our shared goal is to impress upon our stakeholders that our enforcement cases are procedurally sound and substantially meritorious, keeping in mind that our early years spell the legal basis for future enforcement cases or actions. Let me turn now to policy support and market studies. The PCA also gives PCC the power to review policies and regulations which may adversely affect market competition. The Commission, through its legal and economic offices, has been providing inputs to the executive and legislative branches to ensure that the competition lens is considered in the formulation of bills and regulations. In this endeavor, we are guided by the principle that the preemption of anti-competitive conduct is far more cost-effective than detecting and pursuing anti-competitive conduct later on. Specifically, the Commission submitted its amicus brief to the Supreme Court, advocating for the nullification of the Philippine Contractors Accreditation Board's nationality requirement in licensing contractors in the construction industry. Since being established, we have completed and submitted a total of 23 policy research, sector studies, and comments on various bills and regulations, including those from the Senate and the which either advocate for pro-competitive policies and changes or inform our enforcement actions. Most notable of the completed market studies include the rice issues paper and the market scoping study in the manufacturing sector, which guides enforcement prioritization. The Commission remains committed to advocating for sound policies based on rigorous and legal analysis that will only serve to improve the quality of goods and services Filipinos consume. In pursuing competition advocacy, competition policy took a leap forward when it was given an entire chapter in the country's medium-term development plan, PDP 2017-2022. Let me note, Mr. Chair, that this is the first time in our history of economic planning that a standalone chapter on competition policy is found in the country's development blueprint. Thanks to this administration. This chapter was largely informed by the Commission's National Competition Policy Review, an exercise conducted by an independent experts review team that led to a broad scoping study of the country's competition landscape and identified key priority areas. The inclusion of a dedicated chapter on competition in the PDP reflects the recognition that competition is part and parcel of the government's development strategy towards a more inclusive and sustained economic development. The PDP 2017-2022 identified the following sectors for competition analysis and enforcement: agriculture, manufacturing, power or electricity, telecommunications, and transportation, including logistics. Guided by this whole-of-government approach, the PCC has executed several memoranda of understanding or memorandum of agreements or MUAs with other government agencies to foster coordination and avoid conflicting policies. These MUAs contain provisions for policy coherence, 1. Policy coherence, 2. Streamlining of procedures, 3. Sharing of information and technical expertise, and 4. Investigation and enforcement support. To date, the PCC has MUAs with the Department of Justice, Securities and Exchange Commission, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Office of the Ombudsman, Insurance Commission, Commission on Audit, Office of the Solicitor General, the Public-Private Partnership Center, and the Philippine Statistics Authority. Looking forward, the PCC is exercising efforts to expand its coordination with other government agencies to boost its capacity for enforcement, merger review, and market monitoring. Good morning, Congressman Romaldo.
Mr. Chairman. Of course, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Balisacan beat me to the punch, but I wanted to introduce and to have it on record that joining us is the Senior Vice Chair of the Committee on Trade and Industry of the House of Representatives, Congressman X.J. Romualdo.
But who is not a senior citizen?
Definitely not a senior citizen. He's actually single, sir. He's still single. Sir, he's actually very, very eligible. Very eligible. Single gihapon.
Okay. Continue, sir. Continue.
Of course, the PCC has long recognized that at a relatively new institution, or as a relatively new institution with various constraints, effective advocacy with our stakeholders is the key to doing more with less. The Commission has extended its reach to various sectors with a view to raising awareness about the PCA in the hope of creating a culture of competition in this country. In this endeavor, we are greatly assisted by our institutional development partners and more experienced competition authorities around the world as they regularly provide us assistance in terms of building technical expertise in competition analysis. The Commission has continuously conducted dialogues and roadshows on competition law and policy with our stakeholders and partners, particularly the business community, the media, and the academe. These efforts allow us to receive inputs and gain new perspectives on emerging competition issues in various industries. To date, we have conducted a total of 61 programs and activities on capacity building and advocacy for the benefit of our staff and other stakeholders. Let me turn now to the issues and challenges we are facing, Mr. Chair. Our constant evaluation of our day-to-day operations, as well as numerous opportunities to interact with our stakeholders, have provided us an understanding of the current issues that the agency faces, as well as the emerging challenges in competition enforcement. Given the broad scope of the PCC's mandate, the Commission is constrained by limited awareness and understanding of our competition law and the agency's mandate, as well as a tight merger review timelines stipulated under the PCA. In terms of rates, the PCC has yet to fully utilize existing channels in interacting with sector regulators and other government agencies to act as champions of competition in different industries. In addition, we are also confronted with the problem of limited presence in regions outside of Metro Manila. We are just located presently in Metro Manila, Mr. Chair. Moreover, as the agency reaches its third year of operation, staff retention and salary competitiveness have become issues that our Human Resources Division has increasingly needed to address. Based on our estimation, the attractiveness of our compensation and benefits package has been constantly eroded by SSL salaries in other government offices and much higher salaries in the private sector. In effect, the Commission finds it hard to recruit the best personnel, and what is more alarming is its inability to retain deserving talents trained and developed as competition practitioners. To cope with these challenges, the PCC is bracing itself given the realities of a globalized world. This means that cross-border competition concerns and global mergers or cartels are seen to intensify with globalization. Also, disruptive innovations and the features of the digital economy make enforcement more complex and warrant appropriate technical expertise. Another emerging issue is the detection of anti-competitive practices and policies in smaller markets or at the LGU level. Hence, we have been building our capacity to address these emerging challenges. Moving forward, Mr. Chair, this means several things. To complete our enforcement framework, the PCC is currently drafting its rules on leniency and forbearance, which will soon be subjected to public consultations, while our guidelines for inspection order will be endorsed to the Supreme Court for approval. These rules are expected to be completed by the second half of this year. Completing this framework is necessary if the PCC is expected to be an antitrust regulator with sufficient teeth to ensure that it's strict compliance with the law. Presently, our M&A office is drafting its rules on joint ventures, PPP projects, and exemptions of certain transactions from compulsory notification. These rules further streamline our M&A procedures and are aimed at significantly reducing transaction costs for notifying parties. Moving forward, the M&A office has identified the following priorities. It aims to improve processes to promote the ease of doing business in the country and impose remedies and encourage voluntary commitments and potentially anti-competitive M&As that have been reviewed by the Commission. Taking our cue from the PDP 2017 to 2022, the PCC commissioned several issues papers or studies to gain a good grasp of select industries and flag potential competition concerns. For 2018, these industries include manufacturing, poultry and livestock, rice, pharmaceuticals, land and air transportation, e-commerce, retail or supermarkets, rural finance, and telecommunications. In the pipeline are issues papers on bakery products, milk products, and fertilizers. Furthermore, the Commission identified the following sectors as its priorities for 2019: logistics supply chain, corn milling and trading, refined petroleum manufacturing and trading, sugar, and pesticides. These priority sectors are based on the issues papers on manufacturing that we have just completed, Mr. Chair, and among other considerations. Based on deliberations, the PCC will decide whether these sectors warrant further study or enforcement action. Still moving forward, the PCC also aims to conduct more strategic advocacy activities for members of the business community as our key stakeholders. We'll also continue to strengthen partnerships with government agencies to advocate pro-competitive policies together with the media and judiciary. To further sharpen the expertise of its operational units, the Commission intends to implement a long-term capacity development program and tap into the expertise of the academe to catalyze development of competition experts. So I'm glad to hear about competition law program in Ateneo. We should have more of Ateneos in the country. With a staff consisting of 153 members and still growing, the PCC is in full gear, committed to our vision of one day becoming a world-class competition authority. Keen observers of competition authorities have noted that the PCC has performed a remarkable feat of quickly scaling up its operations, building its institutional knowledge, and greatly improving stakeholder awareness. However, as with all policies, the key challenge is sustaining the momentum to ensure that more can be done to fulfill the agency's mandate. In this regard, a firm commitment of support from government, including our legislators, is crucial to ensure that we will continue to deliver top-notch service. Filipino consumers and businesses deserve no less. To close, I would like to thank the honorable senators and representatives for their time and attention, and I would be glad, together with the colleagues from PCC, including Commissioner Amabel Asuncion, I would be glad to answer any questions you may have in the discussions that follows. Thank you very much, and have a pleasant day to all.
Mr. Chairman, we will allow the members of the panel to ask questions. Okay. Okay, sige. No, while you're preparing now. Chairman, you mentioned that you're proposing a new organizational structure for your commission. In adopting a new organizational structure, don't you need legislative support for that? Don't we need to amend any law?
Our charter provides that the organizational structure and the salary package of PCC are approved by the President.
Through the DBM?
Through the DBM.
Through the DBM.
Yeah. So the DBM, I think the President and the DBM have...
So okay na yun. The existing legal regime will allow you to do that.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
But the salaries, because you said may problem on retaining talent, you are SSL.
We are not.
You are not.
We are not SSL.
Okay, you're not
we had a little bit of premium over the SSL in 2015 when the salary package of PCC personnel was designed. But so the basis of the salary then was in 2015, and Then we had SSL in 2016, and we never, our staff never had any increase since then. So it's now eroded by inflation and also by the SSL.
Ayan, pare, makinig ka. Makinig
Yeah.
ka doon. Hindi sila makaretain daw ng good stuff.
Mr. Chair, while we're on the topic, so we don't go back to it, how many I'd like to zero in just on the technical support that you have inside the commission. Just for lawyers, for example, how many items were you granted for your lawyers? And what's the average pay you're paying your lawyers?
I can generate that information, Mr. Chair, and provide it to you in a little while. I'll ask my staff here to look at the numbers. But I said we already have a little over 40 lawyers. We still have some unfilled ones, legal positions requiring law graduates, but these are at the lower level, attorney 1, attorney 2, and it has been so hard to fill those up because you can't compete anymore with the private sector, and those, in fact, some of our lawyers are now migrating to other government agencies because the salary now in other government agencies under SSL are improving. So we have lost the initial advantage.
So very quickly, so we can give the other members a chance to also ask questions. Before you answer that, Mr. Chairman, how much in your budget do you have for engaging outside legal services?
That's something that we are still exploring with
You don't have a budget for
because we don't
engaging
have we don't have
specialized legal assistance
no,
locally or from
there is
foreign consultants?
No, unfortunately, no. We cannot. There is a circular of the OSG, I think OSG, no? that requires us to get permission from or approval from OSG, and I think also from CUA before we can hire a private legal practitioner.
Have you sought that exemption?
Well, I brought this attention already to, and I've written the OSG about this so that we can. I get an initial response saying that they can do it on a case-to-case basis, but that would not work because the way the merger review, for example, moves very quickly. We have only 30 days to act on a merger review, otherwise deemed approved. So if we are not very quick in bringing in the lawyer that we need, then we lose the chances to rent the review to the merger.
Sir, you were going to answer how many?
In a plantilla of 200, that's a lot. That's one-fourth. No? And about average roughly 50,000 pesos gross. It's
And at any one time, how many
monthly.
deals are you reviewing? At any one time, like for example, right now, how many deals are you reviewing?
Deals for the merger.
Everything, all the cases you're handling at this point in time. If I just asked you, Mr. Chairman, how many cases are we studying right now?
We have four FAIs at the moment, and then one under preliminary. But you also have a lot of queries coming in that would need some at the attention of our lawyers. We have for mergers. We have now very roughly siguro mga 5 mergers a month. And you see, when we have a merger case, what we do normally, and this is a practice everywhere, is we form a team of lawyers and economists and other experts. So a case can easily comprise of 5 members, and so you have 5 of those cases in the enforcement, 5 of those cases in the merger, and then we have another set of teams looking at policy and regulations like assistance to Congress, commenting on bills, and they are really so threats at the moment.
Mr. Chair, I would like to now yield to to the other members of the honorable panel. But the point I was just driving at is, we are reviewing billion peso deals, and if you want this commission to do its work right, then I think you have before you very progressive and very sympathetic legislators from both houses of Congress that would like to help you get the correct technical support and help. But you have to make a convincing case of it. And thank you very much.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Gatchalian.
Mr. Chair, first of all, I'd like to thank PCC for the support the organization gave us, especially during critical bills, critical proposals being tackled here and also in the House. The participation of PCC is so important. There are a lot of things that we might not see in the proposals that inadvertently might create or stifle competition. And the presence of PCC during those hearings is quite important. However, I was looking at the approved structure as well as the proposed structure. Nowhere in the structure is an office for legislative liaison, which I would like to urge the organization to institutionalize. Yan po yung nagiging problema with other departments whenever we request for comments or at least presence man lang. They would always send someone junior who cannot participate proactively or give us relevant information. I'm urging the PCC to institutionalize that office so that communication and also information to the legislators will be constant and will be relevant. As, hindi ho minsan ho kasi we experience here, nagpapadala ho ng junior officer who cannot participate proactively. So it's very hard to solicit information that will craft or improve that bill. So, and it goes the same for the other departments, but since we're in the topic of table of organization, I'm urging PCC to institutionalize that.
Totally also thought about that in one of our planning sessions in the Commission, Mr. Chair, especially after the experience we have had over the last 2 years and the potential for enhancing the competition lens in our legislation. We would want to have a more engaged participation there, and at least because our view and experiences in many countries is that it's easier to it's much more cost effective to get those competition lens early on in the design of the bill or the policy or the regulation than going into investigation later which could last years.
Mas maganda ho kung proactive sa design pa lang ng bill. You can already include some competitive provisions there that will enhance competition of a certain industry or sector. Mr. Chair, just on another point, you mentioned earlier cross-border concerns, and this goes to a very current issue on the ride-sharing sector, in which Grab purchased Uber in Southeast Asia, and now Grab has a virtual monopoly of the market here in Southeast Asia, including the Philippines. And this is actually a very new concept, in which the headquarters, I understand the headquarters of Grab is in Singapore, whereas Uber is in the Cayman Islands, I understand. It's not even in the US or in Europe. I understand it's somewhere floating in the world. So how do we now enforce anti-competitive rulings on this type of cross-border, even borderless transactions? And we will see more of this in the future, in which applications or mobile apps will be transacting with mobile apps, not transacting with the company directly. And how do we now avoid anti-competitive practices in the future in line with this type of environment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you have raised a very important question, because this is what's cracking the heads of many competition authorities around the world now. They found, and we are finding, that the tools that we have with respect to analyzing or competition in the context of e-commerce, digital economy, algorithms and AI, artificial intelligence, requires a very different frame and a very different different sets of tools. And we are sharing experiences with many countries, including the EU and the US, Singapore, and how to deal with these concerns, and that's why I raised it as a flag earlier, Mr. Chair, during my presentation, that this is one area where we need to build expertise, because this is the future. The competition or monopolization is not going to be about interaction between people. It's about interaction in the apps, as you pointed out, in the algorithms. There are humanless and faceless art of controlling the markets, and that's where we need to strengthen our capacity moving forward.
Chairman, is there a
maybe
Interpol of competition? Is there such a thing that
there is an informal network, the International Competition Network, but we also participate. There's no formal organization like what you have in WTO or IMF for banking, you know. But I think the world is realizing that there's got to be some stronger global efforts to coordinate actions with respect to cartels, because even cartels becoming global. For example, the cement cartel is found everywhere. And if you look at those, it's almost the same companies. You know, in Africa or in Latin America or in Australia, that's what you see. And so we have to have a way of sharing information globally, and we have to find a way of restructuring ourselves such that that can happen.
recourse for now? No, I'm sorry, Commissioner. I just want to. What's a recourse in the absence of a global agreement on this type of transactions, no borderless transactions? What's the recourse of PCC? And for example, I'm just thinking off top. No, for example, Amazon starts buying Lazada, starts buying OXL. What will then? No, Amazon will pretty much control the entire e-commerce market of the Philippines. What will now prevent? What can PCC do to prevent those type of practices from happening?
We still have some. The lawyers in the commission can like Kumama could elaborate on this, but we have the flexibility to and the power to influence the outcomes of the games. For example, I think in the Uber Grab case, for example, is the commission's empower to impose remedies and the transaction. We can also still undo, and if they want to stay here, the Philippine nexus of the assets could be sold to any other third party, say other than Grab. Those are kind of options that are available for at least in the application of our Philippine competition law. Maybe what?
So just to add to that, Senator, so the extraterritorial enforcement of the rulings or decisions or even remedies imposed by competition authorities is always a challenge, not just for us, but other competition authorities as well. In Europe, for example, they have the European Competition Network, wherein the agencies within the EU would coordinate to make sure that they're able to effectively enforce their decisions. So there is that kind of coordination. Even during the time that they're reviewing the cases, they're already coordinating so that they can make sure that, one, the rulings are consistent, and number two, that they are enforceable. Now, in our context, we're starting to build a similar network with ASEAN countries. So that's in the works. Now, while that's still ongoing, in terms of how can we enforce our decisions. For example, in the Grab Uber case, while the headquarters of Grab is located in Singapore and then Uber is located somewhere out there, they do have their they do, which by the way is a common structure for organizations, for companies, for other purposes. But they do have assets here. Their operations are here in the Philippines. So in that, we have jurisdiction over those. So we can still enforce the remedies in terms of how they will operate in the Philippines. So we're not totally powerless in that sense. But of course, there's still that challenge enforcing it outside the Philippines. But as I said, we are already coordinating with other competition agencies in the area.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to go back to the issue on salary competitiveness, because, you know, the SSL exemption was something that we really tussled with the DBM with when we were crafting the law in the previous Congress. So I'd just like to ask what the issue really is, because precisely, you know, this is something that we really fought for, because one, we wanted the Commission to be able to attract and keep the best talent, and second, we wanted to provide, you know, some sort of protection against being tempted and captured by the firms and industries that will be regulated by the Commission. So this is, to me, you know, as one of those who really, you know, wrote the law, this is really a very important provision, salary competitiveness. So we'd like to ask, what really is the problem there?
Mr. Chair, the statute or the PCC law provides that any changes, increases in salaries or benefits of PCC personnel would have to get have to have the approval of the President. So every time you want, and of course the approval of the President means that you've got to go to pass DBM, because nothing will move at the office of the President without a DBM premature. So we have had this, been requesting DBM for a reconsideration of our case. In fairness, they are now studying it. I hope this time they will give us a better attention. But that's the problem there, Mr. Chair. It's not every time there is say increases in the salaries of national government agencies like in the SSL. Hindi automatic yung pag-adjust ng salaries ng PCC. So what I am suggesting we are suggesting to DBM is that we can agree on a certain premium, no matter how small that is, but at least when government agencies or national government changes its salary structure, dapat susunod kami and still maintain the premium at saka automatic. So that's the problem, Mr. Chair. I think the intention was great, but the implementation was...
Okay. So that's the problem. Because when we were doing that, our model was the BSP. That was like the standard that we wanted to follow.
Charter of BSP does not require
Approval.
May I just add, siguro the other issue also is yung plantilla positions po that were created. So for example, for the lawyer positions, we have attorney 1 positions. For the kind of work that we do, we need lawyers with more experience. So we cannot attract po yung ganung level of experience for an attorney 1 position. So it's both the salaries as well as the plantilla positions available. They're not, they're not suitable for the kind of experience that we're looking for.
Proposed organizational structure that we have submitted to the Office of the President and to DBM address these issues. For example, another issue that's become very serious concern for us, Mr. Chairs, in all competition authorities around the world in EU, they have a general counsel that would advise the Commission. We don't have that in our So that's that's why it has been it's really
Can you propose for that in the new org that you or did you? I proposed for that. Samba City. Ayun, okay. Office of the General Counsel nandito sa rightmost. Okay. Okay. So no need for amending any law. You also mentioned about adjusting threshold amounts. Ano naman yun? No need to amend any law? Any provision of law?
that's in our power already.
Power na yan,
Mr.
okay.
Chair.
Mr. Chair, on another topic, there are other, currently in our setup, there are other regulators also, no? Such as the ERC, the Energy Regulatory Commission, in which, when they were created, they were all given the power to approve rates, as well as to investigate anti-competitive behavior. I know in the past, no, PCC has been trying to come up with an agreement or an MOA with them to specifically delineate the line between what can ERC do and what can PCC do. Ilan po ang ganitong situation, and have PCC started to come up with agreements with them so that in the future, confusion will not come up whenever investigations come up. That's an issue here in the ERC. No? Wala pa naman nangyari ngayon, but if ever there's an anti-competitive practice that the ERC is investigating, and then PCC will also investigate the same complaint, paano ho, dalawa nag-investigate? What if there'll be two different resolutions to that investigations?
Chairman, connected. Klaro ba sa mga agencies ang meaning ng anti-competitive behavior? Is there only one meaning? Baka one meaning sa inyo, one meaning sa ERC.
That's a very good question, Mr. Chair, because that's why we are focusing so much on advocacies, because every time when we go to even sa mga local airports natin, kapag makita nila yung ID namin na Philippine Competition Commission, sabi nila, anong sports ang pinopromote nyo? So, even our people sa customs or immigration, when they see our ID, they ask us, what sports are we promoting? You know? So that's the kind of that's why we have to really do a lot of these advocacies, even in our among government agencies. And you're right, Senator Win. We have had, that's a big challenge, as I pointed out in my presentation, working with together with the regulators and other regulators. In our it's kind of the environment in other jurisdictions, competition law works very well when the competition authority and the regulators, the other regulators, can work together harmoniously, you know. And that's why we have been prioritizing and getting this partnership with other agencies. And as I enumerated earlier, we have succeeded finalizing one with, say, the BSP with respect to banks and other financial institutions, with the Insurance Commission, with the Security and Exchange Commission. So here we defined, we tried to put coherence into our policy and how we can share information and how we can order the investigation or review, such that, and the overall objective is so as not to make the cost of doing business even more costly than it is now, you know, because if we become another layer in the bureaucratic arrangements, that will not improve the business climate. So that's what ERC is. That was one of the first agencies that we targeted from the very start. But partly because medyo may organizational problem sila lately. So, but I think the current chair is very receptive. We talked with her lately and how we can coordinate, cooperate, and she's quite responsive to this MUA. So hopefully we can get one that can improve the coordination between the two agencies.
Chairman, moving forward, do you suggest we should clarify that in the law, that in matters of anti-competitive behavior investigations, in matters of anti-competitive practices investigation, it should be solely the responsibility of PCC? Should that klaro ho, no? Because a lot of these sectoral regulations have been created prior to PCC. In fact, they are the de facto investigating body for anti-competitive behavior for that sector. No? But moving forward, do you propose that we should include that in the law?
I think in the future it will be very useful, but for now siguro we'll try to do first because my appreciation of the bureaucracy is once you start to quarrel about territory, nothing will be achieved. No? So we're trying to reach out to explain why this is very important in the health of our economy, and why we should work together. And so far, as you can see from the list of MUAs that we have made, I think it's a good indication that we are able to get that cooperation.
Senator Angara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Magandang umaga po sa ating chair, commissioners, and guests. I'd just like to ask a somewhat philosophical question, but how does national competitiveness factor into the decisions or the considerations of the Commission? I was trying to look at the law we passed a few years ago, but in the sense that we also need champions abroad. So does that change how you view markets, the size of the market? Is it the ASEAN, for instance? Because it's part of your job to ensure a level playing field, and in that sense you need to cut down certain firms and prevent certain transactions, and that's understandable. No? But what I hear from a lot of industrialists is that, well, in ASEAN we're nothing. Parang we're not even in the top 100 banks, for instance. So how do we reconcile those goals, for instance? Is there really a tension, or is it just apparent? Yeah.
No, not really, because the first stage of any analysis when we do whether it's merger review or enforcement is to define what's the relevant market. So that relevant market, depending on the industry or the sector, or can be as small as an LGU, or can be as big as ASEAN, or even the global economy. We have had transactions where we view the transaction as more than national, because they.
Yes, Chair, my focus is on the larger side. No?
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying about the small LGU and anti-competitive practices, but more of the larger scale, the need to also have industries which can compete, maybe. Is there a tension? I'm wondering, yeah. Or maybe we limit their action domestically, and then say if you have capital, then you go invest abroad. Is that or can you reconcile these goals? I'm wondering, yeah.
If I may answer, Senator. So this issue is also apparent in foreign jurisdictions. And I understand the argument to be we should allow our domestic companies to grow in order to compete globally. So why are we stopping them from doing that? That's the argument. Again, first is, as explained by Chairman, we always look at first the relevant market, if it's local or national or global. Second, I think we shouldn't forget that the other side to that issue is, if we encourage that and that alone, are we going to sacrifice the interest of the consumers? Because whenever we analyze the impact, let's say, of a merger, it's not just about the businesses themselves, but it's the impact also on the consumers. So if we allow, let's say, a merger to become, let's say, two competitors becoming a monopoly. Okay, so they will be a bigger company, they can compete globally. However, what is the impact of that on the consumers in the Philippines? So that's part of the entire assessment. Now, if that will not really result in impact on consumers, that will be detrimental to the consumers, then by all means we will allow that to happen. But that's part of the equation. It's not just about allowing businesses to grow. The consumer interest is always part of the assessment.
Let me add also, Mr. Chair, I think that's a good, Commissioner Amabel's point is very good. Let me just note that becoming big per se in our law is not necessarily anti-competitive, no? Or it's not necessarily prohibited. No? It may happen that one has become big because they are really more efficient than others. Then that is not prohibited by the law. In fact, that's allowed by the law. That efficiency, growth driven by efficiency. By efficiency as reflected is, say, in lowering decreasing cost, and that is translated into lower prices for consumers, then that is not prohibited. If a merger takes place in such a way that the higher cost firm is absorbed by a lower cost firm, and then the net effect is a lower product prices, then that's not, yes, good for the consumers, good for the country, good for growth, good for the economy, good for employment.
Thank you. Yung going back to my issue about national competitiveness, does that factor in the need to kind of be competitive? Ito naman, I was talking on the firm level. Ito naman sa country level. Comparing, for example, in your future issues, you mentioned digital economy. I'm wondering what you were thinking about. Sen Win raised already these issues about the new economy type of companies, no? But there are a lot of associated issues like taxation, for instance. We may be losing out because we are not competitive on a country level. Like maybe our policies on taxation, on regulation, on employment are not on a par with, let's say, a Singapore or a Malaysia, for example. Does that factor into your thought process or your policy when you make recommendations? I'm wondering. Yeah. Independent of your thinking as a former economic planner, Chairman.
Yeah, yes, of course. In fact, Mr. Chair, this is also part of the confusion in the field, no? Equating competitiveness with competition. No? Competitiveness is a much broader concept, no? The competitiveness can be affected by the tax policy, by the investment policy, by the roads, by the investment in public infrastructure. Competition, our lens more about how.
I understand the distinction you're making, and precisely that's my question. Does that other type of national competitiveness factor into your thinking? You can say just yes or no. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yes, to the extent that they may affect the market in a way that that the structure of the market leads to substantial reduction, say in competition. So we look at that. For example, incentives. Okay, since our lens is on the market, if we give incentives to a particular firm, and that firm turns out to be also a government corporation, for example, is that a competition issue? It is a competition issue, because you are affecting the ability also of the private sector.
Maybe let's operationalize it. When you say the digital economy, for instance, is a future concern for you, how are you viewing it? I'm wondering. Because I'm viewing it from the lens of national competitiveness, for instance. I'm saying we don't make payments easy enough because there's no system for electronically. Physically, the seller still has to get the money from the buyer. Unlike other countries where everything is done online, there's no more physical transaction. And that's something, for me, that makes us less competitive on a national level. Does that factor into your decision, or you're just saying you're limiting it to I'm wondering, how are you thinking of the digital economy?
Yeah, of course, we look at we look at particular markets affected by the digital economy, but we also look at the overall broader aspects. So in a sense, the bottom line is, will that improve efficiency? Will that result in lower cost for consumers? Will that improve quality?
Sa digital economy nga, ano yung concerns nyo as the PCC? What have you flagged as your concerns?
The greater
Because that will affect efficiency, di ba? The efficiency of the transaction. Mahirap magbayad. So that's less efficient, di ba?
Yeah, I think this is you're raising a very important issue, Senator, because this is a concern in many countries too. The issue that's seen, I think, is more on the how that say a platform or on an apps can influence the way other markets work. I'm talking about foreclosure, for example. In the case of the famous Google case sa EU, where Google was fined 2.4 billion EU, no? No, the previous one. Where the competition issue there was, Google has its own app for when you do search for restaurants also, but it has competitors. But when it displays the results of its apps, it's all, Google's is always on the top, and the other competitors are down the way. So the consumers and users of the platform could not use that. That, from the point of view of the competition authority in the EU, is anti-competitive.
If I may just answer also, we do take into consideration the efficiencies that will result from a certain transaction. I think what you're saying is, let's say, it's in the digital platform, it's like I think you're talking of a vertical merger, for example. Yes. Sorry. So let's say you might be referring to a case that we had before, a merger case wherein a platform provider was acquiring a payment system. Okay, and that is supposed to bring about efficiency. So that's correct. Okay. However, we do not just stop there. We have to check also if there will be foreclosure to other payment systems who can access that platform. So that's something that we had to make sure was not going to happen. But still in recognition of the efficiency. So the analysis has to be really balanced. And in the end, if the efficiencies would outweigh the concerns, then we will allow it.
Could you talk a little bit about your enforcement actions? You mentioned doing 4 administrative investigations: cement, power, garlic, life insurance. Were these motu proprio, or were they prompted by certain complaints? How long did they take? What were the findings, etc.?
Some of them were prompted by request. Like, for example, the garlic was from Senator Villar's committee. It was, he endorsed her findings to our the power is from the Secretary of Energy himself. No? So I think in some cases from the private community from the private sector.
So garlic was prompted by Senator Villar. Power was prompted by the Secretary of Energy. What about cement and life insurance? Were these prompted by any complaints? Private sector complaints by a player in the industry, or consumers, or?
Consumer group, yeah.
And what are the findings in these 4 industries?
Still ongoing.
Okay, ongoing. So, any resolution in the near future?
To make some.
Are these indefinite? Wala kayong periods to go through these?
Maybe Commissioner Amabel can explain the process.
So, Mr. Chair, just to answer your last question, cement was prompted by a verified complaint, and the insurance is a motu proprio. case. So it was initiated by the Commission. In terms of the process of investigation, under the law, we have to do a preliminary inquiry first, which cannot be more than 90 days. So we complete the PI within 90 days. And then after that, our enforcement office, by the way, there's a so the one who conducts this investigation is our enforcement office. The commission proper has nothing to do with that at that level, because we have to maintain what we call a firewall, so as not to prejudice the case. So when the case is still being investigated, it's in the hands of our enforcement office, and only when they file a statement of objections, which is similar to an information, when they file that before the commission, that's when we have complete visibility. So that's the process that we observe. So right now, the 4 cases that are under full administrative investigation are with the enforcement office. We don't really have...
Sorry to interrupt,
Yes.
Commissioner. So in the case of the power and the garlic, that's more of like in aid of legislation type of thing, because this is an actual case
It's an
or
act-
controversy because there's a complaint, so you have to
Yes.
go through that. But in the
Yes.
case of power and garlic, did you follow the same procedure?
Yes.
Also?
Senator.
You also
Yes,
follow the same procedure?
Yes, Senator. So these are referrals, but since under the law there are only 3 ways by which we can initiate, but by which we can start an investigation. One is through verified complaint. Second is through a referral from a sector regulator, and another one is through motu proprio. Since the referrals came from the Senate, and that's under the law, they're not considered as sector regulators. They actually fell under the 3rd category, which is we initiated a motu proprio
So
investigation.
pag
based
motu proprio,
on-
dadaan pa ba sa yung sinasabi mong wall and it has to pass through the enforcement division?
Opo.
It still has to go through that?
Because that's really the investigation process provided by law. And that's also in the interest of due process, because if it goes straight to the commission, there's no investigation that's done by the enforcement office. The parties will not be given sufficient opportunity to defend
Yeah, so
themselves.
it's quite a lengthy procedure, no? Because the enforcement division has 90 days to do it.
The PI,
And then sa inyo, may time limit ba under the law to come up with your findings?
Under our rules, once the case is submitted for decision, so that means after the statement of objections have been has been filed with us, the parties have been given the opportunity to defend themselves. Once it's submitted for decision, we have, I think, 30 days. Is it 30 days? 60 days. We have 60 days to render a decision on the case.
But from the time it goes up to you from the enforcement, what's the lifespan of that? Indefinite, no? Is there a maximum or period for that? To
No.
sort of say you have to decide, unlike the case of mergers and acquisitions, which are deemed approved in... So
Well,
dito, it can take as long as a court, for instance.
In terms of the investigation itself, wala po, the full admin investigation. But the normal time that it takes for investigations of antitrust violations normally would take about at least 2 years, minimum of 2 years.
Okay.
And just to explain the difference between the antitrust investigations and other, let's say, criminal investigations, mahirap po maghanap ng direct evidence kasi sa ganitong klaseng mga violations. For example, cartel, hindi naman po tayo makahanap ng agreement na nagsasabing mag-cartelize tayo. So our enforcement office would usually start with looking for indirect evidence that will lead them to direct evidence. So medyo complicated po.
Matrabaho siya. Okay, got it. Last, with indulgence of my colleagues, Mr. Chair, last question is, which industries have you flagged as less than competitive? Is that something you can disclose to Congress, to the Oversight Committee, for instance?
Cell phone.
Or I would assume you've already flagged the telecoms industry because that's taken that's gone to court already, no? Any other industries that you see as less than competitive or with less than desirable competitiveness levels?
In the manufacturing sector, where we already have a issues paper, and the indications of possible competition issues are present. doon ho na-identify yung mga sectors. But
Ay na lang po namin para
yeah.
we don't put you on the spot.
I could provide I could provide you a copy of that issue sweeper. But
Sige po, sige po. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you. Just in relation to the issues on cases filed, one of the interesting things I remember about this is with regard to the provision of the revised penal code on monopolies and combinations in state of trade, because the law would repeal that provision. Pero I remember we put in a provision that violations of Article 186 that were committed prior to the effectivity of the law would still be prosecuted. Because I remember at the time, there were already cases with the DOJ. I think it was LPG ata or basta that was an issue kasi I remember na if we repeal it, those cases would be dismissed. But we put that provision in talaga to ensure that they won't be dismissed. Are those cases still ongoing? Are there updates on those cases?
Good morning po, Honorable Chairpersons of the Senate and House panel, as well as the members of the Senate and House panels. As regards to your question po, as far as I can recall, there is a provision in the law and even sa bicameral discussions po that if cases are already pending with the DOJ, for instance for preliminary investigation, before the effectivity of the law, then those cases will proceed without going through the Section 31 requirement po, which vests the PCC with sole and exclusive authority to initiate a fact-finding or preliminary inquiry of violations po ng PCA and other competition-related laws. At that time po, there is this pending preliminary investigation for garlic cartel. And then just last year, na-file na po yung case sa RTC Manila po, yung garlic cartel case na yun. And then there's this also one case which was committed and pending with the DOJ before the effectivity of the PCA. It's rice cartel po. So Article 186 violations pa din po siya involving a certain individual. And it's already been submitted for resolution po.
So those are the only two, rice and garlic.
Yes.
Are there
Yes, po.
pending cases pa on criminal
Article
with regard to
186 pending with the DOJ for a preliminary investigation. Wala na po.
pero with regard to the competition law na the criminal violations?
For the PCA, wala pa po.
Wala. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And also one other thing, Mr. Chair, we recently passed and the President recently signed the Ease of Doing Business Act, which provides for certain periods. Would the PCC be affected by those provisions? Then I think it would be 20 plus 20 working days and 20 working days, so 40 working days maximum. Would the PCC be affected by that new law?
we will be affected, Mr. Chairman, but we would like to, of course, ensure our legislators here that we intend to comply with and do our best in improving the business climate. What we would want to do is once the implementing rules and regulations are or the team that will craft the IRR, we would engage ourselves to present the case of our case and see how we could navigate the PCC's operations in the context of the Ease of Doing Business Act.
Yeah.
Actually, Mr. Chair, it's posing some difficulty on our part. We are still hoping that we will not fall under that law. Because as it is, the 30-day period to finish phase 1 is already very tight. The analysis and that we have to do, the fact gathering, is very intense. So even the 30, and that's 30 calendar days, that's not working days. So sometimes parties would file their notification on a Friday. And so it's really very tight. So to subject us to this 20 working days period restriction is really very challenging if we're going to be covered by the law. And then we also, now for mergers which are which raise concerns, they go to phase 2, and under the law we have 60 days to do phase 2. That's in the PCA. And the law that was just passed does not seem to accommodate for that. So that's a problem for us, because what does that mean? Are we now bound to finish everything within 20 working days? And then if not, then it's going to be deemed approved. But you have the law, you have the PCA, which specifically provides for the periods for merger review. So we would like to take actually the position that the PCA periods should apply to merger review and not the periods under the law that was just passed. I mean, there are reasons why the periods were defined to be this way under the PCA.
Intent kasi, Mr. Chair, was to really cover everything, all agencies. So, well, yeah. So perhaps they can lobby when
I agree with Congressman XJ. The intent of that ease of doing business is to cover all government agencies. But you can argue nga that they can argue siguro na to cover all in terms of transaction or application for permits and licenses. Ito hindi naman ito eh. This is actually more of a parang judicial to eh. There is judicial review. So ganun lang argument plus the specific versus general argument. Specific law versus general law argument. So good luck. Okay. Pero tama naman, ganun lang.
Mr. Chair, we need you. But Mr. Chair, we need your help.
I just point okay. Okay na XJ? Kasi okay. Kaya nga last question or suggestion sa inyo. Do you have a legislative wish list? So any provision in your law which you want to be adjusted, amended, or any other provision or any provision in any other law which you want to be amended, kindly communicate with this JCOC so we can help you with your legislative wish list.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I think when we reach after gaining more experiences in implementing the law, we will have a more systematic approach to evaluate, assess, and come up with a proposal on how one can improve the law. At this point, we are not ready for such.
We are open. Ganun lang.
Yes, sir.
We are open. Just feel free to communicate and be honest with us kung ano yung ano. Okay?
Mr. Chair, can I just appeal? So just to compare with other jurisdictions, yung timelines nila for phase 1 and phase 2 are even longer than ours, and then meron din silang tinatawag na stop the clock. So even with the longer periods, the authority has the ability or the power to stop the review at certain points for certain reasons. Kami po, wala po kaming ganun. So yung 60 days, 60 calendar days for phase 2, very tight din po siya. And when merger goes into phase 2, that means it's a problematic merger. So we really need that time. I mean, of course, it doesn't mean that we'll always exhaust the 60 days, but to the extent that we have that period to finish the review and make a correct assessment, kailangan po talaga namin yun.
Commissioner Ama, hindi ba nasa stop the clock yung if it's the parties who ask for a continuance?
Nangyayari lang po yun if they offer voluntary commitments and then they execute a waiver. So it's dependent on the party.
Otherwise, if I'm the lawyer, just keep asking for postponement, para, di ba? If the clock is ticking, di ba? Doesn't make sense.
Sa kanila, sila lang po ang pwedeng mag-stop the clock because they will execute a waiver. Pero kami, we cannot. Oo.
Mr. Chair, very quick questions lang po. Did you set some money aside from your budget for maybe hiring foreign consultants or local consultants to help you with your technical work?
That for our mergers and acquisition, we do hire consultants to help to assist us, but not foreign consultants, just local consultants.
Or kung local po, how much po na-set aside sa budget ninyo to engage local lawyers or local technical consultants?
Maliit lang po.
Mga how much nga po?
Do you have the numbers? We have 8 to 10 million pesos, which if you are going to use a law firm, that's nothing.
Total po yan or you're just saying that's the cap?
That's
Total
the
lang sila.
total.
Total 8 to 10 million.
8 to 10 million.
Kung if the chairman was practicing today, you cannot afford the chairman. You cannot afford the Senator Sani. You cannot afford him kung ganyan ho yun because of their competence. XJ Romualdo, you cannot afford. So, that's what one important issue lang I'm driving at. And very quickly lang po, yung nag-review po kayo nung kaso nung sale nung franchise ng yung sa San Miguel po. You reviewed that, right? And that went up to the Supreme Court on the telecom because we were also talking about telecom. And the Supreme Court ruled against you not on grounds of merit, no? It was because it was just naunahan kayo kumbaga. Wala pang decision sa Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court hasn't decided on the case yet, but
So, pending pa?
Yeah, it's pending.
It's still pending. And you're very quickly, ang position nyo doon, why you're questioning it
We are
or
just
objecting to it. You're objecting to it, right?
The Court of Appeals issued a an injunction against PCC to continue its review of the transaction. And it's all about our power to review a transaction. At that point, the two parties went to court to stop us from reviewing the transaction and the allegation that we don't have any more jurisdiction for that.
So, Mr. Chair, you have not even made a finding on this transaction. You've just been
Not yet.
stopped from
We
reviewing
just
it.
wanted to finish the review.
So, you have no findings yet.
No findings yet.
Um,
Preliminary.
There is a preliminary.
There was, at the time, the Merger's Office was able to issue already a preliminary statement of concerns identifying the issues arising from that merger. So hanggang dun lang po, tapos nagkaroon na ng TRO.
Yeah. Are you allowed to share the preliminary findings?
Wala, may gag order po kasi. So it was it was posted before, the preliminary statement was posted on our website before. However, a gag order was issued against us, and the order included an order for us to take down the statement from our website.
Yes. And even in an official hearing between, in a hearing such as this, the gag order covers that as well.
I'm not quite sure.
Pwede daw po. We can, I suppose we can give a copy.
So pwede naman.
Copy.
Pwede naman. Sige.
Maki-Viber na lang daw. Maki-Viber.
Sana on behalf of the members of the committee, sana I hope the joint committees can be furnished quietly a copy because it also helps us in our work. Because we're reviewing some things in the House right now about franchises. Thank you very much, Your Honors.
So thank you, and we shall proceed to hear from our invited, the other invited guests. So, can we hear from the DOJ, ma'am? Attorney Agtarap? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start by giving a brief background of the OFC. It may be recalled that the Office for Competition was established under Executive Order Number, which was signed by then President Aquino in 2011. So we turned 7 last June 9. And under the Philippine Competition Act, which was enacted in 2015, the OFC was retained under the Secretary of Justice as a department's department's specialized unit on antitrust or competition matters. However, our mandate under the PCA is now limited to the conduct of preliminary investigation and prosecution of criminal violations of the PCA and other competition-related laws. And if we go back to Section 13 nga po ng PCA, there's a qualifier there that we can only conduct PI or preliminary investigation prosecution subject to Section 31 po. Kumbaga lahat ng competition complaints have to go through the PCC for fact-finding or preliminary inquiry. And if the evidence so warrants, the PCC may file a criminal complaint with the DOJ Office for Competition. And because of this nuance po ng batas, just recently, Secretary Menardo Guevara and Chairman Arsenio Balisacan signed a memorandum of agreement to formalize our partnership and coordination in terms of the referral of complaints, so that if a complainant comes to us or in any of our prosecution offices, marami po kasi pwedeng within Luzon or Cebu or Visayas or Mindanao po, meron na po kami isi-set up na mechanism such that complaints will be referred to the PCC for fact-finding or preliminary inquiry. Yan po. And one of our priorities at the moment is the review and finalization of the draft rules implementing the criminal provisions of the PCA. We are working closely with the PCC right now through the Competition Enforcement Office in the fine-tuning of our leniency rules, which is patterned after the leniency program developed by the PCC pursuant to Section 35 po of the PCA. So we're also constantly communicating with our prosecutors within the department, and just last year we conducted a series of Module 1 or basic training on the PCA for our prosecutors, local prosecution officers po nationwide. So we've been giving a series of lectures, and the PCC has been helping us in this task by sending or providing resource persons. And we had the sense, based sa initial feedback ng mga prosecutors po namin when we've been going around the country, hindi po sila familiar sa mga basic concepts ng competition. And at one point, may mga empleyado din na similar to what Chairman Barisacan has mentioned, parang Philippine Competition Commission, is this under the OFC or the DOJ? May ganung basic na confusion pa. So we have to continue informing them, educating them, or familiarizing them with PCA and the interface between the PCC and DOJ, as well as between the OFC and the National Prosecution Service po. Once the draft rules are finalized, we are hoping to be able to finalize as well and submit to the Department of Budget and Management our proposed reorganization plan. Kasi kailangan din po namin mag-reorganize because yung current na structure po ng OFC, may mga economists pa, may mga lawyers pa. Because prior to the effectivity po of the PCA, marami po kaming functions which include the conduct of sector studies and the conduct of fact-finding, investigation. Ayan pa. So we will continue with our capacity building for prosecutors as well as for the investigators within the OFC. And ayan pa. So, we can provide a narrative of our report for the previous years po. We'll just send them through the committee secretary. Thank you po.
Thank you, ma'am. And in the course of your practice, if you have encountered a legal provision you want amended, repealed, please feel free to communicate with our committee.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you po.
So let's proceed now to the DTI. Yusek Castelo, please, if you have any comments or inputs.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and the honorable members of Congress. Mr. Chair, we would just like to inquire from the PCC how they are able to come up with policy notes affecting trade and industry regulated by the Department of Trade and Industry. It appears in the presentation made by Chairman Balisacan that the DTI is not among the partner agencies that they coordinate with. And this would be, Mr. Chair, evident in the policy note on the construction industry in December 2016, issued by the PCC, saying that the foreign industry, the construction industry should be open to foreign contractors when the industry was already open to foreign contractors at that time. And yesterday in the news, a statement also came out from the PCC that SRPs should be removed on basic necessities and prime commodities. And the department is most of the time surprised hearing statements from PCC when we are not consulted, Mr. Chair.
Can you react na?
Yes,
For
yeah.
my guidance na rin. Kasi
yes, yes.
medyo-
Okay. No, just to correct Mr. Chair, we have sit down with Secretary Lopez and talked about actually coming up with a MOA, something like that. In fact, in our list of agencies forthcoming for MOA, DTI is included in our priorities, no? Especially that in the context of now this discussion about incentives and there is a strong interest for us, and I think that you are right that the industry is a very important sector for us not to, as I also pointed out earlier. Mr. Chair, to cut short, we really intend at the PCC to work closely with DTI moving forward on this. We will get back to the secretary to. In fact, he assigned when the last time we talked about this cooperation partnership, and that was in the context of SRPs and because he actually asked us to look at the SRP, and we did provide him, DTI, our note, our assessment of the SRP. But we want to move on from there and explore this partnership with DTI.
Mr. Chair, it is just unfortunate that when the policy note came out on opening up the construction industry, I was the Undersecretary for Construction. And now that we hear SRPs to be removed as recommended by the PCC, I am now the Undersecretary for the Consumer Protection Group. So we would just want to invite attention of PCC Chair to Section 32 of the Philippine Competition Act that says, where appropriate, the Commission and the sector regulators shall work together to issue rules and regulations. And we are very open to a discussion with Chair Balisacan, Mr. Chair, just to inform him that we also wish to be consulted so that we can give our position on particular issues that they would wish to issue policy notes on, Mr. Chair.
Record, Mr. Chair, I actually have submitted a draft MOA for the comments of DTI. No? That was as early as January. But we haven't received yet any comments from...
According to Yussi Castelo, the MOA must be with her. Joke lang kasi para pero but we get the point. We get the point. Tama. I'm looking at section 32 rin, pero okay.
The office of the Secretary of DTI covers so many areas that we are interested of. Hindi lang sa pickup or sa mga different agencies na BOI, PESA, ano.
So that's the commitment that the PCC and DTI will sooner or later sign a MOA. Okay, sige, okay. Ma'am, you said we'll proceed, okay. But thank you for pointing that out. So can we hear from the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry? Philippine Chamber of Commerce Incorporated. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Attorney Bengson, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the House and the Senate, good afternoon. I am here to deliver the observations and the assessment of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I might start by saying that we view that the Philippine Competition Act is a landmark legislation that put the Philippines in the radar of other important economies. Through the Competition Act, the country is now seen to adhere to international standards in the promotion of an even playing field where large and small businesses are provided with equal protection from abuse of market power and dominance, thereby protecting consumer welfare. We in the PCCI view this as a good confidence-building measure. In terms of our assessment and observations on the implementation of the law, we have three observations. Number one, today very few Filipinos enterprises, especially MSMEs, are aware of the Competition Act, indeed of competition in general. We might cite a report by the PCC itself that 1,200 households, out of 1,200 households surveyed by the Commission last year, 76% agreed price fixing is inevitable, 74% believed market allocation among competitors is beneficial, and 68% could not say for sure if they prefer more choices in the market. Not surprisingly, less than 1% knew about the Commission, the PCC. And so, in support of our first observation, the major observation is public awareness. The PCC must strongly work on public advocacy. Such will enable the public to understand and support the work that they do, and create the competition culture to make competition work. A major obstacle that we see moving forward, for example, while many complain that a primary reason for us having poor and expensive telecommunication and internet services is the presence of only two players in the market. But consumers and other advocacy groups have been quiet on the case filed by the PCC against the two players on the Vega Telecom's Holdings acquisition. So we are wondering, where is the public support? Again, the PCC must work on its public advocacy. Second observation. In terms of implementing the competition law, the PCC has done considerably well. Having only 140 staff, yet being able to review and approve 143 out of 151 notifications for mergers and acquisitions within the 90-day mandated time frame is quite impressive. Similarly laudable is the PCC's undertaking of case studies to establish thresholds for different industries, given the different capitalization requirements and market sizes of each. The conduct of market studies on rice, meat and poultry, pharma, land transport, air transport, agricultural credit, digital commerce, retail and telecommunications to identify competition concerns is likewise laudable. Our third and final observation and assessment lies in what my Attorney Anthony Abad terms as competitive neutrality among government entities. The PCCI says that the real measurement of success will rest on how the PCC is able to build and complement regulatory quality and support developmental programming to ensure consistent and effective exercise of consumer protection among our regulatory agencies. The Competition Act can only be truly effective if it is complemented by a competition policy that boosts market performance by, among others, correcting the dual regulatory and operational functions of some government entities, and thereby creating a level playing field between state-owned and private enterprises in consideration of public interest. Of note here, if I may cite just a few examples, you have the Philippine Ports Authority acting as a port operator and also setting a regulatory mechanism and acting as a regulator. You have PAGCOR operating casinos and regulating the gaming and gambling industry. And you also have the National Food Authority performing those same functions. So those are our three observations and our assessments in a nutshell. Thank you for your time, and good afternoon to all.
Thank you to Attorney Bengson for the inputs. So, you want to react? Yes, Chairman? Yes, but...
Wanted to point out, Mr. Chairman, that in the case of the third issue that raised by Mr. Bengson, government, particularly NEDA and PCC, together with other agencies, are currently crafting a national competition policy that would cover competitive neutrality issues to address these regulatory concerns.
Chairman, the question just suddenly occurred to me. What is the legal basis for PCC's issuance of your so-called policy notes? The one to which Yusek Castello referred.
Under the law, we have the mandate to do market studies, to advise government and executive.
What's the section?
policy.
Because I have the law before me. What is the section?
Section 12.
Section 12.
Section 12L. So monitor and analyze the practice of competition in markets that affect the Philippine economy. Where's the...
Implement and oversee measures to promote transparency and ensure that prohibitions and requirements
Yes.
are adhered
Yes.
to.
And then K also is for issuance of advisory opinions and guidelines on competition matters. And then R is for advocacy of pro-competitive policies of the government.
R?
Yes, Your Honor. So K, L, and R of Section 12.
Okay. R2, mas maganda, advising the executive branch on the competitive implications of government actions, policies, and programs. So, okay. Good, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. So, can we now hear from the Ateneo de Manila University School of Law, Attorney Abad? And then, Pañero, mag-adlib ka na lang advice on the effect of the ease of doing business on the PCA to advise the PCC on what to do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, good senators and congressmen, first of all, thank you very much for finally convening the Congressional Oversight Committee. I've been hoping that this would happen because the way I see competition law is it's a very dynamic type of law. So it's very at any point in time, a competition law and its precedents and doctrines is very different from even just 1 year ago or 2 years ago. So it's always something that has to be constantly reviewed and understood. Mr. Chairman, just for your information, Mr. Chairman Balisacan mentioned it took 24 years to pass this law. I was involved for 22 years in trying to pass this law. It was
for a time very frustrating advocacy, but finally it's in place thanks to you in Congress. So what Ateneo, or I mean, what we represent now is we would like to offer our services and volunteer to help the Oversight Committee and of course the PCC in helping enhance the evolution of competition law and policy in the Philippines. So we make ourselves available for, especially for some of these breaking issues like how does technology get involved, the issue of international jurisdiction. Is there an evolution towards a treaty that will now, in the same way that the WTO resolves trade cases, possibly come up with some form of treaty to resolve international cases of competition, and also on the regional level. And then topics like, I suppose, anything that would be that would require an academic analysis of an issue, we can come in and step in. We're most happy to do that because it will also enhance our own research capabilities at the university. Now, one issue I wanted to start off with, Mr. Chairman, was the issue of the national competition policy, which Chairman Balisacan had just mentioned. I actually was the one who put it in because there's a recognition that competition policy, the framework itself, is not solely the responsibility or duty of the PCC to implement, but it's actually a national effort. And many of the initiatives or the type of reforms that have to be put in place are also out of the scope of the PCC. For example, a lot of the legislation that would complement the enforcement of competition law is actually vested more with Congress and with the national executive departments. Reforming the way we regulate different sectors based on a competition standard is something also that we have to look at the national level. So when we look at national competition policy, it's actually something that I think NEDA and the whole economic managers together with Congress would have to come up with a whole inventory of new legislation. So our recommendation is really to come up with some kind of a comprehensive review of economic legislation based on a competition standard. Okay, so in reference to Attorney Bengson's concern about government agencies that have dual functions or conflicting functions, perhaps we have to look at now all of these laws and reform them so that you know that the agencies or GOCCs involved are not competing on an uneven field with private sector. And in the same way that regulation, like for example, state-sponsored monopolies are already phased out, so that you're really establishing an architecture for a market economy based on this standard. So the PCA, the Competition Act, is really about a comprehensive competition policy for the country. It's not just merely the enforcement of anti-cartel and it's really about establishing an economy that's based on market principles. And that's what we'd like to offer our help in looking at this from a big picture point of view. And as we said, we make ourselves available for this purpose. Now, we have specific concerns that, well, I think I'd rather put this now into writing, I mean, about how we can improve or enhance the existing legislation, the PCA. Some comments on the ease of implementation. For example, the ease of the merger review, the ease on the part of the private sector. But we'll make these comments known to the Oversight Committee and of course in consultation with the PCC. And as I mentioned, any academic studies that concern some of these issues that are sort of, maybe they're still esoteric at this point in time, because how do you analyze online platform type businesses, or cryptocurrency, blockchain? How are all of these analyzed from the traditional tools that we use for competition? It becomes different because, for example, the problem with platforms is they're all aiming at monopoly power. They're trying to bring in as much membership as possible, and then sort of simulate their own market within their platform. But in the end, we want to do it based on what is best for society and for the economy. Senator Angara, you mentioned the national competitiveness. I just wanted to mention if it's credible with you, the Michael Porter model from the business school, which has been also used as a tool for competitiveness index analysis. In this diamond, one of the key points there was vigorous local competition. So when he identified a champion in national across different countries, these national champions tended to have started out with vigorous local competition. That's how they became competitive. So I don't know if that's an insight that could help.
My question was, is the tension more apparent than real? Because maybe there's really no tension, because you can regulate them well at home, and that makes them strong in a way, because they're able to compete better and provide better services.
Yes.
And that leads to better performance abroad. So they say it's more apparent than real.
If they have cutthroat competition at home, it usually leads to
That's true. Yeah.
championship abroad.
Right. And anyway, it was clarified also by Chairman Balisacan when he said that size per se is not something that the law or the commission is against. It's really the effect on consumer behavior, or its effect on consumers.
And then we are actually helping also the Department of Justice. Maybe one concern which we will put into writing is the issue of the element of surprise, which or what they call the dawn raid. The problem with cartels and cartel behavior is that the moment they know they're being investigated, it's easy to cover the evidence. Unless you have a whistleblower or somebody who's willing to turn in the rest of the group. So we would like to help the PCC by assessing the sort of working relationship with the DOJ, so that you have sort of a quick or rapid investigation capability, but at the same time that we're not sacrificing due process. And also that maybe that there will also be a need to look at our leniency and forbearance program to encourage members of cartels to turn in their cartel before the investigation happens. But it's one of the tricky type of cases. Now, the Department of Trade and Industry actually was a very active partner of our technical working groups, dating back to about six congresses back already. And it was because of the concept that competition and consumer protection tended to go together. In the last Congress, we thought that, we sort of did a strict application, like that we actually should separate unfair competition and unfair trade practice, which is consumer protection. Yung mga mislabeling, false advertising, which are not really competition issues, but tend to affect consumers. And we said that we should be pure in the way we apply the competition law. And that's why we ended up with a model of pure competition enforcement. But I haven't come up with a final conclusion yet, but I'm starting to rethink, we're starting to have some discussion with other jurisdictions, namely the Australians, that perhaps it might be more effective if consumer welfare is actually brought into the picture with regard to competition. In other words, there has to be a closer, really working relationship with the consumer group of DTI in the implementation or towards consumer welfare. No? That actually goes hand in hand. Yeah. And I think I shall stop here for now, Mr. Chairman, and I can answer any questions, or we can make our... if, with your permission, may I ask my partner, Attorney Alcantara, to also
Attorney
chime
Alcantara,
in.
please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to the House panel. I'd like to add one more item for the review of the Congressional panel and a suggestion to the Competition Commission. A review of the public procurement laws, particularly in competitiveness aspect. On one hand, you have to regulate public bidding because most of the antitrust issues, particularly as examples, is in the EU and the United States. Bid rigging most happens at public procurement. So it's both the national procurement law and the regional procurement laws. But on the other hand, we can't also stifle it too much. Like, for example, asking for a merger review or joint venture review at the pre-bid conference stage. But my suggestion is probably have it done in those I guess entities or joint ventures who have already entered the qualification stage. So not at the pre-bid because it would actually hamper the liberalization of players who come in the markets, but in the qualification stage. But also it may be a special exception for utilities. There's both an antitrust issue for bidding of utilities for both service and goods, and the law may be stricter at this point, particularly if bid rigging happens in utilities. It's actually it's better to create like a task force just to look into this. And on the qualification, there has to be a stricter qualification when it comes to entities or utilities providing service to these aspects. So thank you.
Thank you, Peñera. So, any questions from the panel members to our resource persons? Yes.
Just a quick
Okay,
follow-up
Senator
question, Mr. Chair, and this is actually directed again to Chairman Balisacan. Is the PCC consulted in the formulation of the FINL, the Foreign Investment Negative List?
I was not consulted. I'm not.
But I was looking at the partner agencies. NEDA is not here in the partner agencies.
Yeah, but I'm familiar of that
course.
at least
Yeah.
because of my previous role, Mr. Chair, and
No, the reason why I asked, Chairman, is there are a lot of industries there that foreign investors or foreign companies are barred from participating. No, one of which is foreign contractors cannot participate in government-funded projects. No, in effect, that's exclusively for local companies. No, in the age of the Build program, no, nagkakaubusan na ngayon ng local contractors, no, especially the big ones, no, the ones that can build probably billions of pesos worth of projects. And my view on that is by limiting foreign contractors who are coming in, not only we limit competition, but we also limit new technologies from coming in, especially in big projects. And I think in the formulation, because FINL is the document that regulates all of these industries, no? Among many industries that it regulates. And I think the voice of PCC is very important in that formulation, and as well as in the suggestion on which industry we should liberalize already, no? Especially in this type of high growth environment. What's your view on that, Chairman?
well, Mr. Chair, on the construction thing, that's precisely the argument made in the amicus that we submitted to the Supreme Court on the construction industry. On the question of the negative list for FDI. My personal view, I'm not. I'm trying to disassociate this view with the rest of the commission, Mr. Chair, is that opening up the economy to foreign investment is the only way for us to go to sustain rapid growth for the next two or more decades. The Philippine market's too small, and too small even to generate all the employments you need that will raise wages too high. You need to create a much bigger market for our people, and that can be achieved if we open up the economy and of course you have to be careful too opening up from those destructive ones. You don't want them to. I mean, that's why a lens like a competition lens can also help enhance the quality of the markets that you're trying to expand. So that has been my personal advocacy as an economist, that the old days of protecting our market are gone. Nobody in Southeast Asia or in Asia is still in that mold. We have to become part of the global network.
Can you discuss very briefly your findings on that construction industry? Because that seems to be a low-hanging fruit in the FINL. Wherein, if we liberalize the construction industry to foreign contractors, allowing them to participate in government-funded projects, then in effect we create a much bigger pool of contractors that can undertake billions of pesos worth of project. But can you discuss very briefly lang po yung findings nyo doon? No?
The issue is just about barrier to entry. Again, in the competition lens, barrier to entry is a problem. And in this particular case, it is that barrier is essentially putting up certain standards that are applied to foreign companies but not applied to local companies. And of course, if you do that, then you lose your chances of not only getting more capital, foreign capital, but also the technology, the institutional processes that could help improve the way our local companies and the local industry can do infrastructure. So that's essentially it's a barrier to entry that we're trying to address.
The other side of the coin, Chair, will it hurt our local companies and effectively kill them if ever we allow foreign contractors to come in? Based on your findings, I just want to broadly touch on your findings.
Offhand, I don't think so, because there is a big complementarity between local companies and foreign companies. The foreign companies will likely bring the very high capital-intensive equipment, for example, but they are likely to work with local companies, especially if these are projects in far-flung areas, in the provinces, in the regions. They have to work with local companies. I can't imagine otherwise, because they simply from a cost perspective, efficiency perspective, it makes more sense to and we see that in the manufacturing sector, when the foreign investors come in, they don't bring their foreign workers, all their foreign workers. Maybe they bring their CEOs, but the rest of their officers are hired locally.
Okay, so from a competition lens, you would rather see that the sector be opened up, no? Okay. But it doesn't mean that just because they're foreign contractors that they build better. Hindi naman ibig sabihin ganun. Hindi ibig sabihin. Basta from the competition lens lang. Okay.
I think it's the force of competition. Mr. Chair, that
Kasi
bring that discipline.
nasa news nga ngayon, in Laos, a dam collapse built by a foreigner from Laos point of view. South Korean contractor yun eh. So, yes, Yusek.
Mr. Chair, if I may just give some inputs on the construction industry. For the information of the honorable body, the construction industry is 100% open to foreign contractors for proprietary technology. It is also open for joint ventures or consortia with foreign contractors on a 70-40 arrangement, Mr. Chair, and 100% open to foreign contractors for foreign-funded government projects.
Funded, USEC, for example, GAA funded projects.
As far as I can recall, Mr. Chair, that was what I did before. It's open 100% for proprietary technology contractors who have technology that we do not have here. There is also a special arrangement for a joint venture or a consortia on a 70-30.
100%, no?
Not 100%, Mr. Chair.
That's 100%.
The rationale at that time being that the local construction industry needs to be protected, and so it will not be monopolized by foreign contractors, and that the competence of the Filipino contractors were at par with foreign contractors, Mr. Chair.
Maybe another discussion. I think that will fall under the Trade Committee anyways. But in one of our hearings, no, during we asked for an update on the FIA, the Foreign Investment Act, and we found out that yes, in normal circumstances, wherein the budget is allocated a certain portion for infrastructure, I think normally in the past about 3% of GDP. But now we're allocating 5% of GDP and more, no? Because of that build. Ang tanong, meron ba tayong enough contractors to build that build program? No, that is now
If I may
the...
answer, Mr. Chair, we have, when I left the construction industry, we had around 11,000 something contractors accredited by the PCAB. We should have at least 13,000 to 15,000 currently, Mr. Chair. And we have around, if I may just include, we have around 1,600 AAA and quadruple A contractors.
Okay, if there are no further questions, okay. So, Mr. Chairman of the PCC, the JCOC on the Philippine Competition Act has been constituted, so we are already existing. I do not know when the second hearing will be, but since we are already constituted, please continue to keep in touch and communicate with us. One of your powers is to conduct, publish, and disseminate studies and reports. So maybe you can, whatever you have published, please furnish this JCOC also a copy of whatever you have published, the studies, etc. Not only your annual, aside, in addition to the annual reports, meron pa siguro kayo mga specialized studies which we can, policy notes and so on. And then, Attorney Abad, thank you for your offer to help this panel. JCS, pro bono. Wala naman ako narinig na quotation eh. Pro bono. Pro bono. Plus the PCC, di ba? You're also offering, you have to, so we will really tap the services, the expertise of the Ateneo School of Law. Okay. So, I would also like, on behalf of the Senate panel, I'd like to thank the House panel for traveling all the way from the House and all of you, suffering the traffic. So, thank you for your attendance. So, ladies and gentlemen, salamat din po. Yes, Chairman Yap.
Mr. Chair, just a few takeaways from the House panel. We will await your request also for beefing up technical support budget. I think the committee would like to know that, your staffing requests. The third would be the opinion of Chairman Pimentel and the other members of the Senate panel, that please provide them the request for any legislative support that you would need. These are both houses of Congress already practically begging you to please send us something to help you with your work, because we all are sympathetic with how important your work is. And please furnish the both committees, the panel, the preliminary findings, your preliminary findings on that telecom deal. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, sir.
So thank you to all. So on the part of the Senate panel, our hearing is adjourned.
On the side of the House of Representatives panel, we adjourn the hearing. Thank you very much.